Hello, I'm Backwater J, and welcome to the first installment of Roleplay 101. In this series, we'll be exploring the unwritten rules of roleplay etiquette and guidelines to creating and roleplaying a unique and memorable character. These concepts will apply regardless of format, so whether you're on tabletop, online RPGs, or Discord or forum RP, you should be able to put this to good use. I'd also like to stress that while I've had a good deal of experience, what follows is my personal opinion. If you find something else works better with you and your group, use it. There are no hard rules to this except everyone should have fun. The first hurdle to overcome with any role playing scenario is creating a convincing character. And this can be a hang up for a lot of people. Before I explore my preferred method for doing this, let's hit on what not to do. First of all, don't define your character by your race and class. If someone asks what your character's personality is and you say dwarf fighter, what does that really tell them? It would be like me telling you I'm an American delivery driver. It doesn't say much. While it's appropriate to incorporate some elements of race and class into your overall personality, they should not be the central element. For instance, it's appropriate for a half-orc character in a D&D campaign to have a troubled childhood, unwanted by either parent, bullied and teased by their peers. Maybe the half-orc character is plagued by self-doubt, or has a drive to prove himself. Using little clues like this can create potentially very different characters from the same circumstances. Second, resist the urge to play yourself. While it is important to find some point of connection with your character, the whole point of roleplay is to put yourself in the shoes of someone remarkably different from yourself. This is especially true when you play multiple characters, since if you're always playing yourself, then your characters won't be distinct from each other. This is why I often play female characters, and why I so seldom play humans. It gives me a point of distinction from the get-go. So now that we've covered what not to do, where should you begin? My preferred method is to start with an archetype. In many cases, even before I select my race, class, and background. Now to clarify, when I say archetype, I'm not talking about the classic Jungian archetypes, though these can easily be used. What I mean by archetype is your character in a nutshell. What are his personality traits? What are his driving motivations? How does he interact with others? A brief aside about pronouns, I am using the generic he to refer to someone of indeterminate gender. It's not ideal, but it avoids plural awkwardness and is, at least in modern English, the best we have in the singular without resorting to it. So please don't take offense, or do, whatever floats your boat. So, crafting a core personality is a tall order, I realize, particularly if you don't consider yourself a creative person. That's okay. If you're stumped, you can turn to your fellow players and GM for assistance. This may be an opportunity to create a shared backstory between several player characters. Maybe they're family members or old rivals. If that's not helpful, remember, it's okay to plagiarize. You're getting together to have fun. No one is going to care if you steal some ideas from fictional or even historical characters. If you change up a few core things about the character, for instance, class, race, gender, or background, people might not even know the idea wasn't your own. And even experienced role players do this, at least on a subconscious level. It is very difficult, if not impossible, to come up with a truly original idea. So don't be ashamed if you end up using someone else's. Now, I could go on for hours talking about how your core character concept can affect your backstory, interactions with the characters in the world, and general outlook on life. But to focus myself, and as sort of a thought exercise, I'm going to create an entirely new character for the purposes of this video. And this character starts with a name. Now, this is a little bit atypical of my usual process, though the name in some variation usually comes fairly early on as I get a handle on what the character is about. In this case, though, I was musing at work a week or so ago about how so many women have floral names. Heather, Lily, Laurel, Daisy, the list goes on. Then I thought, okay, what's a floral name no one ever names their kid? I settled pretty early on Foxglove, since it's a quirky sounding name, and honestly I knew practically nothing about it except the name. Well, it turns out it's a toxic plant that in extreme cases can cause death when ingested. Likely part of the reason no one names their kid after it. Like many such plants, it's also found use in herbalism and medicine over the years. Okay, so right off the bat, one important factor is decided for me. Foxglove's obviously going to be female. Also, the dualistic nature of the plant's toxin suggests her parents were close to nature, so assuming the D&D array of races, which I'm most accustomed to, good options would be Wood Elf, Tabaxi, Forest Gnome, Furbolg. If I wanted to get more out there and risk bringing in some homebrew, I'd add Centaur and various Fey races to the list. Now, of course, I don't have to limit myself to these sort of races. Playing against type can be fun as well. She could be the child of human druids, for instance. Actually, I like the druid thing. I'm going to hold on to that for later, though likely I won't use human. So, Foxglove is the child of druids, likely born and raised out in the wild without much contact with sentience outside her immediate family and druidic circle. I've decided early on I want her to rebel against her upbringing, actively seeking out civilization, creating a point of dramatic tension between herself and her family. It's also an excellent reason for her to begin her adventuring career. In keeping with this idea, I'll make her a half-elf, the child of a wood elf father and a human mother, both druids. This creates another level of tension that may or may not ever come into play. I imagine her mother, who I'll call Julia, pines for her daughter's return, while her father, let's go with Thalen, understands Foxglove must forge her own path in life, and yet must come to grips with how fleeting his beloved Julia's life is. Perhaps it drives him deeper into pursuit of the druidic mysteries in hopes of being able to reincarnate Julia upon her passing, ironically creating even more distance between them. This is a bit of an aside, granted, as it won't necessarily affect Foxglove's personality. But any bit of backstory is a useful thing to have, and knowing a bit about Thalen and Julia's personalities will give us some hints as to her upbringing. Perhaps her father's always been a bit aloof, and her mother compensated by being a bit too clingy with her daughter. Here's where we can start to apply that to her personally. It's easy to understand her parents' attitudes grating on her as she came of age, and her having a knee-jerk reaction against the whole druidic way of life. She left home because she thought she'd be better off without them. And yet on some level, perhaps one she won't admit to herself, she still misses them and loves them deeply. I'll say for the sake of having a handle on this that she's prone to fits of melancholy, often wandering off in the woods alone for hours on end, in hopes these familiar surroundings will soothe her soul. But I don't want this to be the driving aspect of her personality, only a bit of flavor that can be brought in sparingly when the occasion calls for it. Okay, so we've got a pretty good handle on her upbringing and early life. I can reflect this on her character sheet by taking the Outlander or Hermit background, though you wouldn't know it by looking at her. Upon leaving the woods where she spent her entire life thus far, Foxglove becomes fascinated by the bright lights, the hustle and bustle of city life. Once she begins to understand currency, she takes a job in a bustling tavern where she finds herself fascinated by games of chance. Through observation and participation, she becomes quite good at knowing the odds and reading people's faces. Does she cheat? Maybe a little. Mostly she learns to turn her youthful face and apparent naivete to her advantage. After a while, through honest living and luck at the gambling tables, Foxglove has made a modest but respectable living for herself. But the same old wanderlust starts to set in. She's seen what the city has to offer, and it's starting to seem like old hat. Maybe it's at this point she meets the other members of the adventuring party and decides, for a time at least, to throw in her hat with them. This seems like a reasonable place to leave off exploration of her backstory. I can certainly do more fleshing out, but I've got the main bullet points of her life thus far. In game terms, we haven't come up with a class yet, but based on her experience in the tavern, Rogue seems the obvious choice. Alternately, I could switch to a charlatan background to reflect her card sharking days rather than her roots in the woods. Some rule systems, Burning Wheel comes to mind, even allow you to customize your background to reflect these sort of stages in life. In this case, though, because I don't particularly want her to be magical in nature, I'm going to go with Rogue as it reflects on the breaks she's made with her upbringing. It's easy to see her having learned self-defense and hunting in the woods, and further honed her skills with kitchen knives to protect herself from urban predators. Also, Rogue plays off the toxic nature of her namesake, which I like. So now we've got her background, and along the way made some important mechanical build decisions, let's delve deeper into her personality. I've decided Foxglove is still young as half-elves go. I'm going to put her age in the mid-20s, say 24. Despite her limited expertise with the gambling table, she's still very new to the world at large, given her sheltered past. On some level she knows this, of course. But she also has inherited a good dose of elven ego, and so she compensates by putting on a show of confidence, possibly even coming off as a little cocky. When confronted with situations she's not familiar with, her habit is just to try to bluff and bluster her way through. So she's a bit of a trickster character, and a bit of a know-it-all. Despite, or maybe because of this, she is still very naive in many ways, and is easily fooled herself. Obviously she's quiet about her past, though her habits and complexion may give hints to those in the know. This is well reflected by the Outlander background, so I'll go with that. There's also a bit of awkwardness to her interactions. Though she's learned to socialize on a superficial level, she hasn't really learned to read people's motivations. She's completely clueless, for instance, in matters of romance, which she tends to avoid altogether, not for lack of interest, but because she has no idea where to begin. So to reflect this persona of false bravado over a somewhat insecure and naive core, I'll give her expertise in deception, but leave her wholly unproficient in insight. I'll likely even dubstat wisdom as well to further emphasize her naivete. I'll also swap out the musical instrument proficiency from Outlander, which never made much sense to me honestly, to a card game proficiency. That is, assuming my DM is comfortable with background customization. Always ask before doing something like this. It's just common player courtesy. I could go into more depth here, but at this point I've got a playable character with some useful handles on her behavior and motivations, and along the way most of the important mechanical build considerations have taken care of themselves. You could of course adapt this method to most any system and setting, or even freeform RPs without any set of rules attached. I've started with a name for this example, but you could just as easily start with a core personality trait, a role in society, a fictional character, even a Jungian archetype or a Myers-Briggs personality type. The method is the same. You start with something simple and you start analyzing it. Why is he like that? How did he get that way? What choices has he made along the way to end up like he is? How do others react? You can repeat this line of questioning at every step of the process and answer as you go. And before you know it, you'll have a fleshed out character that you're excited to play. Well, that's it for this installment of Roleplay 101. If I've been of assistance or entertainment, I'd encourage you to like, subscribe, comment, and ring the notification bell. I will see you next time. Yeah, that's staying in there.